Wittgenstein and Heidegger versus Science and Technology. 1. Wittgenstein and Heidegger. On Science and Religion. 2. Wittgenstein and Heidegger. On Science and Philosophy. 3. Wittgenstein and Heidegger. On Kierkegaard. Total worldview of modern man has let itself be determined by the positive sciences, which has resulted in an indifferent turning away from the questions which are decisive for a genuine humanity. Edmund Husserl, in his 1936. Wittgenstein and Heidegger. On Science and Religion. Martin Heidegger once wrote of the flight of the gods. This was a reference to what he took to be the ascendancy of scientific culture in 20th century Western society and the concomitant rise of instrumental rationality. Heidegger, along with Edmund Husserl, also wrote of the scientific flight from life worlds. This position can be compared to Ludwig Wittgenstein's view that Western civilization had taken a flight from God. Wittgenstein was also, or in parallel, strongly against, to use a term not often used in his own day, scientism. This scienceophobia, to use an equally rhetorical term, spread its wings and flew out of the domain of philosophy and into the world of literature. It can be seen in Iris Murdoch's following words about the existentialist predicament. Fearful solitude of the individual marooned upon a tiny island in the middle of the sea of scientific facts, and morality escaping from science only by a wild leap of will. It may be incorrect to say here that Wittgenstein's position against scientism, unlike Heidegger's, was apolitical and personal. Heidegger, on the other hand, believed that science can or does lead to tyranny. This is very ironic when one considers his support for the Nazis and their highly technological regime. Yet according to Rush Rees, Wittgenstein once told him that tyranny doesn't make me feel indignant. We can clutch at straws here and say that this was because Wittgenstein believed that although tyrannies can enslave the body, they nevertheless leave the soul free to do what it likes. However, Wittgenstein did once say that history had shown him that science and industry have the power to decide wars. He believed, like Heidegger, that mankind had turned away from God, or from the gods, and put its trust in scientific progress instead. Wittgenstein also once said to a friend, "Just improve yourself. That is all you can do to improve the world." This was a good piece of Protestant theology, that is faith, not works, on Wittgenstein's part. Heidegger was generally more suspicious, at least on the surface, of religion than Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein was much less concerned, that is, in his philosophical publications, with theology and religion than Heidegger. Heidegger also believed that religions should have a strong social aspect, which Wittgenstein didn't believe. This may mean that Heidegger's view of religion generally, if not of theology and metaphysics, might not have been as uncritical as Wittgenstein's. Indeed, Heidegger once said, quoting Nietzsche, that Christianity is Platonism for the masses. Wittgenstein and Heidegger on Science and Philosophy. Wittgenstein argued in his Blue Book, and exactly like Heidegger, that what he believed to be the philosophical obsession with science could only lead us astray. Yet it wasn't only Wittgenstein's much maligned logical positivists who wanted to ask and answer questions in a scientific manner. Someone like Edmund Husserl, as Heidegger argued, did so too. So just as in certain instances, Heidegger saw religion as the source of metaphysics, though he didn't necessarily think that a bad thing, Wittgenstein believed, at least at one point in his career, that our scientific yearnings were now the source of metaphysics. He did think that is a bad thing. In both cases, science is something beyond the rightful ken of philosophy. It is something that had a strong pull on the many philosophers whom both Heidegger and Wittgenstein criticized. Wittgenstein, on Soren Kierkegaard. Man has the impulse to run up against the limits of language. This running up against Kierkegaard, also recognized and even designated in a quite similar way as running up against paradox. This running up against the limits of language is ethics. Wittgenstein's remark about Heidegger. The following is Soren Kierkegaard himself speaking about metaphysics and reason. Do anti-religious philosophers wish to monopolize the notion of reason for the philosophical project of epistemic self-sufficiency? Fine. We will call ourselves the paradox, but when you say that the paradox is in conflict with reason, there is something of an illusion. For this is but an echo of what the paradox has been saying about its relation to that philosophical project since at least the time of the Apostle Paul, 1844-1985. This Kierkegaardian and ambivalent attitude towards metaphysics and reason can also be detected in Wittgenstein. On the one hand, as already stated, Wittgenstein believed that science often initiates the metaphysical yearnings of many philosophers, that is in the early to middle 20th century. Though he also believed that there's indeed something about metaphysics that's deeply attractive, as did Heidegger. He might have also believed, as many other philosophers did and still do, that there's something deep and even magical about metaphysics, though this deep and magical side of metaphysics is precisely what had turned philosophers, including Wittgenstein himself and Heidegger, against metaphysics. And here again we can see the influence of Kierkegaard, who was classed by the logical positivists as an irrationalist, on Wittgenstein. Kierkegaard believed that traditional metaphysicians had de-emphasized the differences between God and man. This, to use a term often used by Jacques Derrida and others, logocentric position also meant that at precisely the same time the distinctions between the logos as it appeared in metaphysics and rationality in ourselves were in certain senses being emphasized. So, according to Kierkegaard, the metaphysical tradition had fallen victim to to use Heidegger's later words, forgetfulness of being. In so doing, reason and metaphysics were deified at the same time as the subject was being slowly obliterated. Wittgenstein, on the other hand, recognized the deification of science, rather than the deification of reason and metaphysics, or as Richard Rorty wrote, "The source of realist philosophy of science is the attempt to make nature do duty for God, the attempt to make natural science a way of conforming to the will of a power not ourselves." In addition, just as Wittgenstein undervalued or underemphasized the importance of speech and language in religion, so too he conceded, if only implicitly and at certain times, that language or words can't tell us what is true or profound in metaphysics. This is strange considering the supposed anthropocentrism of the late Wittgenstein. Indeed, Wittgenstein did say that the expression of metaphysics is a fundamentally religious feeling, a feeling partly inspired by the urge to bang on the doors that are the limits of language. Wittgenstein, like Kant before him, wanted to transcend the boundaries of reason, despite Kant's point that this wouldn't give us knowledge, and also to take Kierkegaard's leap of faith. Note, perhaps it can be said in conclusion, if only for contrast, that there's only one person who's more, as it's often put, blinkered than a scientistic philosopher, if such there be, and that's a strongly anti-scientistic or anti-science philosopher. Wittgenstein shares his anti-scientistic rather than anti-scientific, as in Heidegger, trait with, among others, Friedrich Nietzsche, Thomas Nagel, Edmund Husserl, Colin M. C. Ginn, and many neo-Aristotelian neo-Thomist philosophers.